At the other end of the shop, the team is meeting about another Spanish Inquisition device made famous by Edgar Allan Poe in the Pit and the Pendulum. The pendulum was a large blade attached to a swinging arm. Once the massive armature started swinging, the pendulum would begin its murderous drop inch by inch, driving the victim mad as they spent hours contemplating their impending demise. Dave is adamant about building a pendulum that, once set into motion, will operate on its own with the assistance of gravity.
What we want to do is literally come up with a way to keep it doing that, and if we can use a device as its own weight, it's lean, it's mean, it's engineered. Voila, it's all you.
First published in 1842, The Pit and the Pendulum was set late in the Spanish Inquisition. It is a chilling tale vividly describing the psychological torture of this device. But the team quickly realizes that there are few historical facts on the pendulum.
I tell you what, you show me one that's been built where it drops, and then I'll build
You're
another
the boss.
one.
You figure out how to build it.
Oh, boy.
There are no blueprints for this. We're starting from a picture and a story, and we're taking it from there.
While the guys troubleshoot, Meg checks on the latest project.
I heard that people literally became insane, like, before we even touched them.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah, no, I would not doubt that the Inquisition was as much into psychological terror as physical terror, because that actually tends to be much more effective.
Edgar Allan Poe seized upon this idea of psychological terror in his story. The protagonist wakes up bound to the floor only to discover that there is a blade slowly descending upon him. The reader is transported into the mind of a man who is moments from a slow and painful death.
Though some believe the device to be fictitious, made up by Poe in his story, The Pit and the Pendulum, there is an instance of a man to die by pendulum in Madrid in 1820.
The name of the condemned man was not recorded, but the story comes from a first-hand account written by Juan Antonio Llorente. Llorente was a friar who worked for the Inquisition in Madrid. He used his authority within the church to access hundreds of years of records. It is possible descriptions of the pendulum from Madrid late in the Inquisition inspired Poe across the Atlantic in Baltimore, Maryland, a generation later. Team leader Dave is determined to make Poe's version of the pendulum a reality. He calls Chad into his office to discuss his findings.
I mean, I think this all began with Galileo. Galileo realized in his experiments that pendulums had very interesting properties. And I think it's interesting that Galileo in his time was considered a heretic.
Galileo was brought in front of the Italian Inquisition in 1616. The church believed that the universe revolved around the earth, while Galileo was certain this was not true. He was warned never to publicly state his beliefs again and released. 16 years later, he published a book of his findings and was imprisoned, where he died blind and broken in 1642.
We know that this is the way that you would make a pendulum clock.
Okay.
So all we have to do is take this pendulum of the clock and put the blade on it.
Okay.
The team realizes they must perfect the mechanics of the pendulum so that the blade arm will work as an effective engine for the device. The counterweights must also be perfectly balanced for the blade to drop properly. Later that day, Chad and DJ start to build a working model to test their theories.
So this is the basic mechanism that we got to build today. We're going to build a small mock-up of it, like smaller scale, before we start doing large scale.
The mock-up will be roughly 1/4 the size of the real pendulum. The goal is to make sure what the team has learned about the pendulum works in reality.
The head's going to go this way, so now we have to mount this mechanism on this.
Back at the shop, the guys feel confident enough in their prototype to start building the full-scale pendulum.
We've done enough on the model to make sure the actual concept works, so we're going to move tomorrow into actually building a full-size replica of it.
Edgar Allan Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum was set in Toledo, Spain. During his lifetime, Poe never reached the fame that he achieved after his death at age 40. The next morning, the guys get to work on the full-size pendulum. The team gets the basic structure in place quickly. Then Kermit and DJ step in to mount the gear mechanism and test the armature.
As long as these little tabs hold up, we're in good shape, you know?
In fabricating the blade, Josh tries to remain true to Edgar Allan Poe's story. The writer describes the pendulum blade as a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn. Once Poe's protagonist escapes certain death by the pendulum, the floor opens up to reveal a fiery chasm. It is thought that this plot twist may have been inspired by a passage from the Quran. In one verse of the holy text, a form of execution is described where the victim was thrown into a pit of fire. The guys finish up the dummy for the pendulum, and Dr. Sestak stops by to talk about the slow death that would result from the blade.
Truth is, you know, Eric, he's not going to get into trouble for quite some time, and I'm sure that's the whole method to the madness here. So they'll go through the skin, they'll go through the muscle, they'll go through even the bowel, and those aren't going to be immediate mortal injuries.
Yeah, that's what kind of like in all the gangster movies when like they shoot their stomach out. Those are like that's the slow death.
Absolutely.
The guys feel confident their design is going to work and move the mechanism into the test area for reassembly.
Well, right now, Kermit's fastening it to the ceiling because it is a little wobbly going up, but we're securing it down now and it should be ready shortly.
The time has finally come to test the pendulum. To honor the man who popularized the device, Brian decides to dress the part of Edgar Allan Poe.
Without further ado, Kermit, will you set our pendulum in action and let's see what happens? So the entire carriage or mechanism drops 1/2 inch with every successful swing back and forth of the device.
It's almost maddening, just the sound of this. You get all that clicking all the way down. It would make you think about what you had done in your life.
The team watches the slow, methodical drop of the blade, mesmerized by the sound of the mechanism.
This is where you'd start to freak out, I think.
The blade cuts deeper and deeper into the dummy until it is almost completely severed in half.
That's it.
Well, we've obviously seen the physical damage this will do. Now we want to go down this path of the psychological damage that we do.
Now the team turns to the wheel of misfortune to see who will lay under the blade.
Well, Kermit, you built it, so now it's time for you to spin the wheel to see who's going to have to face our pendulum here.
Oh, wow.
Did you see that?
Mike?
Ironically, my name came up, even though I made the dummy to go on there. It might have been the ghost of the dummy playing tricks on me. I don't know what it was.
All right, Mike, well, the wheel has spoken. So, guys, now it's time to tie Mike to the table here, and it's time for you to face the pendulum.
The guys replace the blade with a foam replica and strap Mike to the table. The safety blade will allow Mike to experience execution by pendulum up to the point of initial contact.
All right, Mike, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I think it's time to let it go.
Oh, yeah.
So if that were a real blade, I mean, that's where we want you to put yourself.
It's kind of hypnotizing.
Be transfixed by it, I would think.
You're just sitting there waiting for it. Plenty of time to think in a quiet room, you know, about your impending doom. So it's pretty nightmarish.
And it just drops incrementally each time.
Can you see it dropping? Or?
No, you really can't. I mean, you could hear it, but it's actually, you know, it's like a ticking clock, kind of ticking away your last minutes on the earth. You're watching it this whole time, and then eventually it just kind of drops out of view, and you know that's it, that's the end. It just nicked me.
Oh, okay. Once you were opened up, you'd be awake and alive and conscious to watch it.
The blade sweeps across Mike's torso a few times in what would be the first painful slices into his abdomen. The pendulum was a challenging build for the Scare Factory crew. but they succeeded in bringing the pages of Edgar Allan Poe's story to life.
Who else can say that they've actually built a pendulum, you know, a fictional pendulum, off of a piece of paper? With this kind of stuff going on, you know, it's incredible. We can let our imaginations go, and we really get something from it. Could you imagine anything that you would have done at all in the past that would have warranted the use of this device?
I've done some bad things, but nothing that warrants this. No, absolutely not.
That's what I think, too.
It's diabolical.